Nice to see you here one more time. Thank you for your time. Let's discuss about beginning of your journey. Why do you decide do what do you do?
Well, yeah, that was easy. So I grew up in a comic book store. My dad owned a comic book store, so I was surrounded by nerd stuff all my life. My mother was a new age hippie, so I not only was I surrounded by nerdy stuff, I was surrounded by spiritual nerdy stuff, right? So like from both sides of it. So I started off playing, like I had a Atari 2600 when I was a little kid. The year that the first Nintendo came out, we got one of those with a little gyro robot and stuff. And then like my parents didn't make me read traditional books, so I was reading comic books, I was reading choose your own adventure books, I was running Dungeons and Dragons for my friends at 10 years old, and then from there it just kind of the nerd just kept spiraling. So it was only a matter of time. I went to college for philosophy and religious studies, but I ended up just keep moving on into it was just a cool background, like logic's super useful, but but eventually just moved into video games. And so I did film for a little while. I was a special effects makeup artist, so that kind of touched on some things for a little bit there too. But yeah, and then moved into video games, and then done that for like the last 25 years. So
amazing. Can you tell more about your first game?
Well, so my first games were running live action role playing games in tabletop, right? Like I was writing for companies and running this at conventions and stuff like that. But like the first video game I worked on was actually a game called Fallen Earth, which is an MMO that's still out there if you want to play it. And that came out in like 2009. Not to date myself even longer. And then, but the first game that came out at the same time was Dexter, the game on the iPhone. So it's based off the serial killer, not the cartoon. So yeah.
Nice. And I think that's very important how human history connect with culture and games that part of this culture. Can you tell a little bit more about your philosophy of what do you doing, what kind of project you're choosing?
Oh, wow. So over the years, I've done all kinds of stuff, mostly because I was working for a lot of companies that were work for hire, right? So we really didn't have a lot of options in what we did other than what we proposed to our clients. Eventually, I moved into the spaces where I had a little bit more control over those projects. And now I have my own indie studio, and we're kind of focused on transmedia, right? So for me, what I think is important is, and this comes from my experience from working with Disney, IP is really important. Brands are important, right? And I think creating in those are the narrative touch points, right? So like creating story and elements that relate to your audience, and then giving them access to that world and story through whatever form of media that exists out there that's appropriate, right? Like, so you're not mix matching it. So currently, one of the projects we're working on, Shadow City Mysteries, we have a narrative adventure game we're doing, but we're supporting it with visual novels. And we're doing it. We had a successful backer kit for tabletop RPG that's in the same world. We have like podcasts in the group. So we have different ways for you to kind of like experience the world and game, and kind of, dive into it however you want to, right? And a big part of us and what we're doing is making sure that all those touch points where it's appropriate for the media and the medium allows the player to kind of shape the world as they see fit, right? So we really want the projects that we do to not only be a cool world that you can experience and be a part of, but also actually make choices that matter. But also, keeping in mind that there's a limit for budget and production, right? So, but I think there's a lot of creative ways that people haven't looked into or overlooked that actually aren't very hard to allow players to make choices that carry over and stay into the world, that don't involve a lot of heavy lifting, just a lot of smart planning.
Nice. Can we talk a little bit about your experience work with Disney? I think
as much as I can, because
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Uh,
What particular? I mean, like it's probably one of the coolest companies to work for. I won't lie. You're just surrounded by creativity, right? No matter
oh,
what group you're. I mean, like I was in the interactive division, and we got to work on a lot of cool prototyping and projects and so forth. You get a lot of support, and you're surrounded by other people who aren't in the creative, but just being in Disney, everybody's in the creative, right? And so, like there's videos constantly playing of the new trailers, like, you're kind of immersed in it, right from the start, and that's great. So having grown up with, my baby room growing up, my mom painted Winnie the Pooh on the walls, and we were one of the first families to get the Disney Channel back in the day when that was like, ooh. So huge Disney fan. So getting to work for Disney was like a dream, right?
yeah.
But don't get me wrong, like all that creativity and everything, it's a multinational company. So there's a lot of things that you're restricted on, but I think they do a lot of things right. For anything, they do a lot of research into what the audience wants, which I think is super smart. They make sure that things resonate and kind of check in with people. I know some people on the internet will scream, "No, they don't, not at all. Whatever, they do. Just maybe not for you." It's a wide audience, right? Like it's hard to please everybody, but but when they get it right, they get it right. That's for sure. So
And how do you decide to make your next step and do something next?
Man. So I'm actually training folks on this right now. I think it's so the market right now is really tough, right? And I think there'll always be room to do your passion project, sort of.
Yeah.
But you got to be careful with that because your passion project may not be marketable or whatever. And right now, people are looking for sure things, or as close to a sure thing, or as low risk as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think right now in the market, if you're just trying to like keep going or whatever, do as much market research as you can. See where the market gaps are. See if you're actually filling those market gaps. See if you're really putting yourself, like, who your competition is really your competition. If you're a 2-person studio and you're saying that 100-person plus studio is your competition, it's not, guys. Be smart about it, right? Be realistic. If you're also saying that like your studio, like your budget is going to be, you need the same budget as the company in the United States that has 100 people, and you can actually probably do that for a lot cheaper in a lot of other countries, right? So be smart about how you're looking at that, because chances are you're probably going to be looking for money, and if you're looking for money, those people are smart too, and they know what the real numbers are, and so you got to be realistic when you're coming to cool ideas. And I hate to say it, cool ideas just aren't enough anymore, right? Like you need to do a lot of research. You need to make sure that like there's a need and a want, right, for the product that's out there. And most importantly, build an audience, build a community. Make sure, like, test your stuff out, right? Like putting concept art on an Instagram or X or whatever, and doing a light ad spend just to see if you get clicks and just see what your click-through rate is a very cheap and smart way to kind of see if what you're working on resonates with people. Because the worst thing you can, and don't think like you need to keep your game super secret. Because I can tell you that like you will not like, everybody thinks they're going to be that game that like just blows up. All the games that like blow up spent years building their communities and getting the right people. Like you might not have heard of them, but trust me, because it's hard to get out there. There's a lot of people out there. It's expensive. Also, like, hate to say it, Twitter, Facebook, or Meta, whatever, which is Instagram as well. All those platforms, Reddit, they don't support your stuff unless you pay. So it is going to cost you something to get out there. So don't overlook marketing and don't overlook building your community. I think that's one of the things. I think a lot of people just be like, I have a cool idea, I'm going to make a cool game, and people are going to love it. And it's just like, yeah, but if you're releasing tomorrow and you haven't spent any time building your community or getting it out there or known, it might be the coolest game in the world, but nobody's going to know. So.
Oh, yeah. And what do you think about new AI opportunity with integration in games and game development pipeline? What do you think about it?
I've got a lot of thoughts on that. It's a tool. So I'll say this: I pro con. So I'm not. I don't hate it because I do think there's a use for it. But I also feel that like there are better ways to use it than have been used so far, right? So I think for aggregating ideas, for cleaning up like I think ChatGPT is great for taking the stuff you have, cleaning it up a little bit. But you have to come from a place of I think any of these tools, you need to be coming from a place of expertise to properly use them. I think if you're just going in blindly, you don't really know what you're doing, you're just doing the thing, you're going to have a lot of erroneous information. Things aren't going to be wrong or whatever. Plus, I mean, like, or you're going to be stealing for somebody, right? I think once we get through that part of it, I think there's a lot of really, really cool uses for and good and useful, like for productivity, for speeding up processes and everything. But I think it needs to be a more closed environment and not this out there just grabbing everything kind of thing, right? I think structuring it in a certain way that like if you have a certain art style for your company and you're doing this, I think you can speed up your processes with certain tools or whatever, right? But going out there and janking other people's stuff, thumbs down. That's not cool. Not cool at all. And you're still always going to need talent and artists or whatever. I think the argument of like, hey, it potentially takes away the space for juniors, right? Like people getting started in there. I think that is worrisome a little bit. Like, how do we create, but I think what that means to me is that we need to solve that problem in a different way, right? Like, it doesn't mean like don't do this just because of this. But I think if this does happen, how do we solve that problem? How do we give people the experiences that they need to get to a level that's higher and do more of that important work, right? I don't know how the solution for that right this second. But I mean, yes, there will be things that kind of get removed or simplified or whatever. But I think ultimately what it's going to do is allow smaller companies to do more because they're not wasting their time on some of the smaller, like more menial, like arduous tasks, right? And that's where I think we need to leverage it. I don't think, but looking for it to be your creative or to come up with something original, no, I don't think that's what you're going to see. But I do think it will improve. Let me scratch that word. You're going to make things more efficient in certain ways. But again, just be careful on how you use it and be respectful. I think that's the thing. But I don't. It's not the boogeyman, but it is. It's. I won't say it's unavoidable, but I think it's unavoidable. Like it's going to be there, and I think not. I'm saying don't embrace it whole harms, but look at it with a critical eye and see how you can leverage it. But I think pushing back on it, too much is not going to do you any favors, and is actually probably going to, hurt you in the long run.
And what do you think about new game mechanics with AI characters or some interactivity with AI?
Yeah, it's okay, but it's not there yet. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a novelty, right? I mean, but I mean, we've had basically chat bots for forever. How useful are how often do you want to throw your phone or punch your computer screen chatting with a chatbot customer service? That's what it is. It's a glorified chatbot because right now, right? Like, so again, until you're still going to need creative to come up with some phrases on the regular that you're going to need and so forth, right? Like it's not there yet. But the speed at
Yeah.
which things are going, it could be, right? But I think right now a lot of it's novelty, right? And I think it's easy when you're going to investors or pitching to companies or whatever that don't know a lot about how we make the sausage of making video games in the first place. They could see that and go, "Oh, why? Yeah, that's great. That's good. You can cut like half your costs right there." You're like, "That's great. Come on, guys." Like, so you got to be careful. I think you can spin a lot to make it seem like it's farther along than it really is, but it's going to take time. But there are people working on it, and we'll get there. So don't
Yeah.
sneeze at, like don't be like, "Hey, it's never gonna do that." It might. We just But
Yeah.
I do think this year, next year, we're going to see some of the shine of AI kind of go away when people aren't seeing the results that they were expecting from it. Um, but yeah.
Currently, one of my dream project I'm working on right now, that's interactive AI fairy tale for
Okay,
Apple Vision Pro.
that's pretty cool.
And yeah.
Yeah. But
And
how far is it? I mean, like again, I think there's a lot of things you could do, right? But then like, you know, the problem always with some of these things is I think again they're really cool ideas, and I think they will get there, right? Like I think I mean, like I remember having some of my friends try out using ChatGPT to run a Dungeons and Dragons game for them, right, or
yeah.
whatever. But the thing is it's also at the point where you can trick it really easily
Mm,
and confuse it. So
hmm.
it's easy to do a demo where the demo is scripted, and you're
Yeah.
like, "Hey, fairy tale person, do this thing," and it does the thing, and everybody's like, yeah. And if you put it in the hands of someone who knows like how to get smart around it, and then suddenly it's cursing or reciting like stuff you don't want it to be doing. So you got to be careful. That's people always find ways to have flying genitalia in your game. Is all I'm saying. Yeah, that's if there's the possibility of it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, that's smart. Uh, let's discuss a little bit on position of design experience.
Mhm.
Can you tell a little bit more about your current project on this point of view? How do you create some design of experience?
Ooh, so usually I mean I get to the heart of like what I'm trying to do, right? For us, our design, I wanted to do a twist on the narrative adventure and the replayability of things. And so like the game we're currently working on has like the intent is that you play it has a new what I call new game plus, right? With a twist, right? So it's a narrative adventure game, though. So we don't make enemies harder. We change the story. So the first time you play through, it's a mystery. And then the second time you play through, it's a conspiracy. And then the third time you play through, it's a supernatural thriller, right?
Cool.
And so the whole idea is that, and this is how we're also maximizing on our production by basically reusing the same areas and the same characters or whatever. It's just the story changes. And like, how you interact and what order you interact with those individuals and so forth, right? To get more gameplay because ultimately once a lot like other than the other choices you make, like how does the story change? It doesn't really change, right? And we're just trying to play up from that. So that's kind of how we're trying to do our worlds is always with a little bit of a twist, as we say, a twist. So yeah.
Interesting. And what kind of steps do you have on your narrative work?
We framework everything. I mean, to do this kind of thing, we have to plan everything out pretty heavily, right? Like, because as one of some of my great narrative friends will say, words are cheap until they're not. Um, and that's the whole
Yeah.
thing, right? Like, if you're doing writing, the more upfront work you do with writing and you lock it, the better. It's when you start changing the story and the focus that has to be reworked heavily, and it gets a lot more expensive, right? Um, so especially for this, because we're planning out basically three stories going on, we have to have very firmly story one, what happens, story two, what happens, story three, what happens, and where it goes, and lock that as much as possible because we start changing things, we start moving the story around, we do anything like that, it's all rework. And as an indie studio, where
Yeah.
you have to be very smart with the decisions you make, right? So for me, smart design is smart production planning, right? Which a lot of times goes counter to the way a designer will think because designers are like, oh, out of the box, all kinds of crazy stuff. But I've always come from a very strong designer slash production standpoint, so I'm always looking at like that's a cool idea, too expensive. That's a cool idea, we can do that. How do we do it in a smart way, right? And I think a smart way is always planning, right? Smart planning. So.
Yeah, nice. And can you tell a little bit about your team? How do you build this?
Yeah, well, but yeah, my team are all people I used to work with. So I have 20 years in the industry. My team is made up of people I've worked with in the past. and I know what their skill sets are. We have a very tight, small core team, and then I rely very heavily on consultants and some co-dev with teams that I feel confident in what they deliver. So thankfully, because I know what my vision is and I'm very clear on what my deliverables are, it's easy for me to go to someone and say like, "This is what I want." They deliver it, and then I go to the next person, and then they deliver it, and then the next person. Um, I don't recommend this for new teams. If you don't know what you want, it'll become very expensive. But if you have a very clear idea of what your vision is and what the end result is, it's much easier to get what you need cheaper. You are going to pay a higher premium because these people have experience or whatever, but you're not wasting money on, ideation and so forth, right? So I think if you do it, have a core team that can give you what you need, and then work with other people. I think this kind of direction you're going to see the industry going in is less big teams and more people that have certain expertise that people can rely on. Which I know is kind of scary, but it's probably moving more towards a movie system, like the movies, and how those productions are done, and less of these giant, yeah, yeah. Don't get real comfortable understanding what being a consultant is, and less of what an employee is. That's what I'm going to say there.
And how do you achieve this state of mind when you know what you want?
Oh well, I mean, I spend all my time thinking about it, right? Like I spend any time, like I'm working as a creative. I think you're always thinking creative or whatever. I think at some point in time you always need to lock something though, right? I think that's the idea, is that if you're always working towards perfect, you'll never get there. But if you work towards good enough, I think you'll be okay. And so the idea is just getting enough of a framework that you're okay with it, and then also being flexible in when new ideas do come. Instead of saying like, well, that negates this, I don't always say that. I say, well, how does this interact with this?
Mhm.
Right? It's that whole like improv thing of yes and, right? So instead of no, I usually like I'll get with my team and they'll be like, oh, but this, and I'm like, and why does this not, like, why are these mutually exclusive? Like, how do we make these work together as opposed to like chuck it out? Because if you're chucking things out, you're chucking work out, and then that's like waste. And sometimes you have to trim the fat every once in a while. But I think you need to always be kind of very clear on what you're doing. But I mean, I knew when we started working on this project, I knew exactly where I wanted to start and end, and where and who the characters were, and what the thing, all the pieces were there. All the people were already there. I'm just kind of the exact things they're saying, and that we're working that out. And but and the small pieces here and there. But
Hmm. And how do you work with your ideas? That some sort of notes, tips on the mirror, on some other instrument?
Confluence. I use Confluence.
Hmm.
But I've moved. So I used to write giant, super thick GDDs. I don't do that anymore. Nobody reads them, right? I used to say like if you make a GDD that nobody reads, then nobody's making your game. If they're making a game, they're not making your game. So ultimately, anything you write as a game designer, you need to make in a way that people read, and that means knowing who your audience is. Who are the people reading your GDD, and how are they going to use it? So, what I write for an artist is different than what I write for my programmers and developers, right? Like they're going to approach it different. They're going to want different information, and so, I think as a game designer, you need to make sure you're a communicator, right? You're communicating your ideas and you're getting it out there. So you need to make sure that whoever's reading it is taking in your information is getting it the way they need it, right? And I always say this: if you, as a this one always sticks with me. As a presenter, when I present something, I want the people to walk away with what I'm presenting. If they don't, the failure is on me, not the people that I present it to. You should never, it is always on you as the presenter and the person giving out communicating outward to be the responsibility of getting that message out there properly, not on the people. You just have to understand who your audience is. And that's why it's really important to realize that when you write a GDD, you're not writing it for just the artist or just the producer or whatever. I personally like to have three levels. I like to have a high level that kind of talks about real simple, right? Like if a CEO wants to know something, they read that top level and they've got enough. And then the mid level is like for the entire team that's actually working on the project,
Hmm.
but doesn't have all the details. It's the mid level, right? But it's enough information that they can go, okay, I know how this works with this works. And then low level, which is like the nitty gritty, right? Like if like the system design, the actual like calculations, if there's formulas, if there's combat, like what those numbers are and everything like that. Um, and by having that, you leave it open for people to go deeper. But
Hmm.
you make sure that it really is designed for who the audience is going to be
Yeah.
reading that, right? So.
Cool, cool. And on the end, let's discuss a little bit about the design of ceilings of game design. Maybe you have new discover in this practice how we can make some feeling inside our players.
Again, know your audience. Like this is the flip side, which being like who you're making the game for, right? I think is really really important. And if you don't know the audience, get people who do, right? So don't
Hmm.
assume, as a mid 40 white male with a beard that I know how to write for a 25-year-old, female from somewhere else in the world, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't, right? Like, I mean, there are story elements that are universal, we can say, but real touch points, I think you do need to bring in experts and do talk to people and make sure that like, hey, does this resonate correctly or whatever, right? And I'm not talking about necessarily sensitivity, though I think it is important. I'm just saying like making sure that you're like if this is who you're trying to write for or write to, make sure it actually is like have like test it, get people in there to like read pieces of it and be like get feedback and like again don't work in isolation. Too many people work in isolation. No, I think yes, there will be people who work in isolation that have a really crazy idea. I mean that is the way some of the world's most famous works have happened, right? And they just, I'm not discrediting it, but I'm saying also that there's a lot of people out there who are doing that. You know what I'm saying? And so I think if you want a better chance of success,
Hmm.
is getting out there and understanding who your audience is, writing towards that, designing towards that, knowing like what they're going to find interesting or whatever. Because again, the worst thing you can do is create a product that's for no. I mean, you can always make a product for yourself, but don't expect that necessarily to be, universally successful or whatever. But again, success is a lot of different things, right? I've created a lot of things that nobody will ever see, but I'm very proud of, and I know is awesome. And then there's other things that are out there that people really really liked and enjoyed and told me, and I'm like, great, awesome. I feel rewarded by that too. Um, so but I think in the video game industry, while a lot of us say we're artistes or whatever, we are trying to survive on it, right? And so that means you need to make money. And it's a business at the end of the day, and I think that is something um, you need to keep in mind. Is that in order to be a successful business, I think you need to really know your audience. And by knowing your audience, you have to study it or whatever. Or as they say, write what you know. So it's design what you know. So if you know one thing, just know that and embrace it and hug it and go full on in it. But yeah.
Nice. Thank you for your advice. On next step, I will make the little podcast with montage, with some shoots with your games, and post them on YouTube and AVP Design Club, the club of designers. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the time today. I really
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
too.
Yeah. Great question. Great
Nice.
questions. I like them a lot. That was good. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's be in touch.